Now I will give the floor to Dr. Estanislao, who is from the Institute of Corporate Directors of the Philippines. Dr. Estanislao is also the Chair Emeritus of the Institute of Corporate Directors, Institute for Solidarity in Asia. He has been the founding president of University of Asia and Pacific, and he has had also a distinguished career in the banking industry, as he was the chairman and CEO of the Development Bank of the Philippines. And in politics, as he have been Secretary of Finance of the Philippines and also Economic Planning Secretary. So Dr. Estanislao, you have been a very old friend of the OECD in this work on corporate governance in general and in Asia in particular. So thank you for your presence here, and please let us explain to us what is the role of boards, so your view, in ensuring this compliance and anti-corruption function. Please.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair. First of all, let me acknowledge my gratitude to the organizers of this roundtable, the OECD, IPE, and the Korea Institute of Public Finance. And Madam Chair, I also would like to acknowledge your chairmanship in the sense that you gave the first 3 slots of this session to those that come from the big guns, India and China, while my friend Abdul Aziz and me are the small guns. So presumably, they should have had proportionately more time than the time you're allotting to Abdul and myself. So I'll try and keep myself as short and as straightforward as possible. This session is supposed to address the broad theme of introducing, promoting a culture of ethics and integrity in individual state-owned enterprises. With your permission, Madam Chair, I'd like to tackle this assignment in 3 short ways. First, to speak about my personal experience in introducing a culture of ethics and integrity to a public sector bank that I was asked to rehabilitate when I got appointed to government. It was a bank that was challenged by issues of integrity and ethics. There were a lot of corruption cases that surfaced, and therefore, when we had to take over, one of the priorities was to emphasize, and therefore to introduce, and therefore to promote a culture of ethics and integrity. At that time, and this was more than 32 years ago, it just shows how old I am. I'm not quite as old in terms of my involvement in the SOE network of OECD, but this experience stems back from some 30 years ago. At the time, corporate governance did not exist. So in effect, we had to invent ways and means by which we could introduce a culture of integrity and ethics. Let me just go through 6 major items that we emphasized in order to be able to do that. First, which I have not heard often enough in this session, is the importance of the tone from the top. And I mean literally from the very top. Not just the chairman and CEO of the bank, but also the head of government and everybody else in the system. This is so important because if you're operating within a culture of lack of integrity and ethics, then the tendency is to just sort of lower down standards and go with everybody else. So if we want to introduce a culture of integrity and ethics, what is critical is very much the tone from the top. And that is emphasized in corporate governance for publicly listed companies. This is something that we should emphasize beyond rules and regulations, beyond sharing of best practices, that the tone from the top is critical and very important. Second, that will have to be reinforced by very clear statements and consistent actions. actions consistent with those clear statements that the old ways of doing things are no longer acceptable, and that there is new standard of behavior that is expected of everybody, and that therefore the system of rewards and punishments must very clearly reflect that these statements that are made from the very top are meant to be the new rules of the game. And very much clearly related to that is that it's not just a question of saying things. It's not just a question of introducing systems or mechanisms of reward and punishment, but also, I think, the proper example of selflessness in public service. It must be shown by deeds and by day-to-day actions that you're not there for yourself, that you're not there, in effect, to accumulate resources for yourself or to steal from the public coffers in order to build up one's bank account. And this has got to be very clearly seen by everybody. And somehow that example which comes through every day is, I think, a very powerful instrument to introduce a new culture, one that is pervaded by ethics and integrity. And this has got to be supported by continuing internal communication. Because it's not enough to say, well, this is what everybody has to do. Through bits and pieces, narratives, short stories, exhortations that are short, that are direct, that are effective, which will serve as a reminder that, in fact, a new culture is being introduced. And finally, corporate events that contribute to a very deep consciousness of the approved and proper behavior of conduct within the enterprise. Now, all of these are very broad brush statements. They are very general, but how do you give flesh and reality to this in actual cases? This is something that I would like to commend to the OECD network of state-owned enterprises, that maybe we've done a great job already putting together many of the suggested best practices and principles. What we need to do now is to bring out very specific cases, which is actually the theme of this session. And I suggest that possibly in the years ahead, we'll be devoting actual cases to how do you do this, how do you do this, how do you do corporate governance in state-owned enterprises. By the way, this case of the Development Bank of the Philippines has been written. It's taught in the Asian Institute of Management. It needs to be reviewed, and I challenge OECD to begin reviewing it so that, in fact, it can be spread as probably one small example from one of the small gun countries that can be shared with the rest of Asia. That's my first part. The second part, I'd like to build on what my compatriot shared with you yesterday, Juan Carlos Barcena, of our Governance Commission for State-Owned Enterprises. In fact, what he did say is Corporate Governance 101. And what I'd like to be able to contribute to that is that installing the different elements of Corporate Governance 101 in state-owned enterprises, ipso facto, is a way of introducing a new culture pervaded by ethics and integrity. Why is this so? Because we all know that in corporate governance, everything starts with the choice of core values. And it is those core values that, in fact, impel the state enterprise to pursue its mission, and therefore to articulate and to try and realize the vision that has painted for itself in the next 5 years, 7 years, or 8 years. But everything boils down to core values. And it has got to be, therefore, the central point of reference for all of the actions and decisions that have to be taken within the state-owned enterprise. And that means, therefore, core values cannot be but related to a culture of integrity and ethics. No matter what those are, there are ideals. These are deep convictions of what must be good, or what we need to do, what we need to observe in order to bring about good things, service to the general public, development, whatever it is that we're looking for. So in the process of coming out with a governance charter, the core values, the mission, and the vision, then you have to articulate what are the strategic priorities that we need to pursue. And therefore, eventually, the performance scorecard. All of those will have to be founded on the core values. And when we speak of integrity, it is simply the consistency between the actions and decisions that we actually take in the pursuit of strategic priorities, in trying to deliver performance on the basis of our performance scorecards. It's that consistency with the core values that we have chosen for our enterprise. And that, to me, definition of OECD is integrity. It's that inner consistency between the high ideals, the high principles, the values. So the delivery of performance is not just a question of this is the performance we have to deliver, but how we actually deliver that performance, which we'll have to follow and stay within the straight and narrow path, which is paved with ethics, integrity, and the spirit of compliance. So my second point, Madam Chair, is that by installing the basics and fundamentals of corporate governance, you already are necessarily introducing a culture of integrity and ethics. For as long as we give due importance to core values, that they should never disappear. They should always be given a lot of emphasis. And somehow they have to take on flesh in the day-to-day operations of the state-owned enterprise. The third point, which I would like to end up with, is a material that is in the making. This is what I call as Corporate Governance 2.1. Now, there is an increasing move, and I hope this is something that we would be working on, for a code of proper governance conduct, code of proper governance behavior in every enterprise, in every state-owned enterprise. This has to be clear and consistent rules, drawn from all of the work of OECD, the United Nations, many other references, and also drawn from actual experience of the enterprise itself. I was interested in listening to the experience of the Indian Railways, very interested in listening to the experience of the China Railways. Interesting. Every state-owned enterprise must be encouraged to come out with its own code, guided, of course, by OECD materials, guided by UN and other types of sources of inspiration and information. But every state-owned enterprise must come out with its code of proper governance behavior based on actual experiences. Because, in effect, ethics will have to be concrete, specific, given the proper circumstances in which that enterprise operates. And beyond that, I just have three simple points in putting together this code of proper corporate governance conduct, which will have to be put together and made to evolve over time. First, a deep dive into what I call as the governance value of integrity itself, which cannot be separated from the other corporate governance values connected with integrity. And that is the fairness to everybody, above all to all of the stakeholders. That's absolutely necessary. Second, of course, is the personal discipline, the personal order of self-control. And third, of course, would be the courage to face up against all odds. Now, this can be subject to a lot of guidelines on how you should act based on integrity, based on fairness, based on personal self-control and courage. Second, which is a set of different corporate governance values, would be those associated with solidarity on the basis of the teams that are really working in the different enterprises. Teams make a lot of difference for an enterprise. Because enterprise is not just one big conglomerate. Down at the bottom, it's working teams of 9, 11, 12 individuals who have to work together in order to be able to deliver a high level of performance. How do they relate with one another? How do they support with one another? How do they relate to the entire enterprise? And that means, therefore, that together with solidarity, you have to have the demands of commitment, a commitment towards each other. How is that lived? Competence, actual ways of raising the levels of competence, and a spirit of professionalism. In my view, this is so crucial for making teams the effective, ultimate performance delivery units of the enterprise. And with this last point, I shut up and finish. And that is to invite the inclusion of governance values related to cooperation and alliance with other parties that are involved in the value chain. Michael Porter is very clear about this. We all live in a world of shared value. And that means, therefore, that we have to work together with other enterprises. We're not alone. We are responsible for the entire system. And that means, therefore, that we have to help one another how to strengthen ourselves as enterprises. And then, of course, making sure that the interconnection and the levels of cooperation between enterprises belonging to the same sector will be strengthened in order to promote the common good of the entire community. In conclusion, let me indicate that a governance culture under a corporate governance 201 aims to do three things: to make every individual in every state-owned enterprise the ultimate governance asset of the enterprise. It has to be that. The final bulwark for governance has to be the individual. And second, working teams have to be the ultimate performance delivery unit of the enterprise. And lastly, of course, the enterprise becomes the ultimate development agent for the area, the sector, the industry to which the enterprise belongs. And if we think of this in corporate governance terms, integrity is not just one abstract piece. It is embedded right into the operation and proper governance of a state-owned enterprise. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Estanislao. That's why we need not only big guns, but small guns that are agile and inspired. Thank you very much. So you covered a lot of ground from the tone at the top to the culture, and the team spirit, the commitment of each and every individual to these governance values, missions, etc. So that's quite important. And I think many of your points are also reflected in the survey and this report that you mentioned on corruption and SOEs. And it shows how many things you need to think about, if you want to really embed these integrity values in the enterprise. So it's not, you need to think about big things like values, missions, etc. of the enterprise, and to think about some of the nitty-gritty things, how you make people work together at the team level. So that's, you need to reach these two extremes, and it's quite difficult. So now we have another speaker, Mr. Abdul Aziz Abubakar from the Institute of Corporate Directors in Malaysia. You have had also a very distinguished career in playing the role of independent non-executive directors in a number of companies in Malaysia. I will mention just a few of them. Affin Bank, International Islamic Bank of Malaysia, the American Trade Asia, etc. You are also the director of the Institute of Corporate Directors of Malaysia and a committee member of the Razak School of Government. You have been also an old friend of this network and of corporate governance network of the OECD in Asia. So thank you again. And please tell us what is your experience in how boards could ensure this embeddedness of integrity values in enterprises, state-owned enterprises.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to set the scene, or as a preamble, in any matters of integrity and ethics, which is what the topic is all about this morning, is the issue of the mindset. In our training academy, we teach directors three things. You need knowledge, you need skills, you need mindset. Knowledge is what a director should know. Skills is what a director can do or cannot do. You may go to jail if you do it or you don't do it. And thirdly is the mindset, what a director believes. Now the first two you can learn. You can come to courses like this, programs like this, you can learn. But mindset, you don't learn in schools. Where do you learn them? You learn at home. The values that you are taught with, not to cheat, not to lie, not to do something that's bad that can hurt others, and all those stuff. Right? Those are things that you don't learn in school, but you learn it at home through your shared values at home. So to start off with that, you can teach as much as you want in terms of ethics and integrity in any institution, right? But the core thing is, how do you ensure that the fear of God, for example, right, is in the individual who's running the company? If you don't have that, you can have the best accountant, the best lawyers in the world. You're not going to get a good ethics and integrity embedded in your system. So with that, I will just quickly run through the Malaysian experience. We have gone through a lot, and I think something that I'm very proud to share, some of which I may not be able to divulge because the case is still in court. So I can only share with you public knowledge, what has been stated in the press. We started off our new economic policy in 1970. That was after some racial riots in 1969. And there were two issues which need to be addressed, which is the poverty eradication and redistribution of wealth between the ethnic groups. And secondly, the acquiring of primarily foreign-owned businesses at that time, which was parked in UK and London. So those are the two objectives of the new economic policy back then. A bit of history of evolution of SOEs. We started off with SOEs like most countries, but we actually corporatized them, we privatized them, and listed them on the stock exchange. So the bulk of our SOEs are actually listed companies, and there are still many which are not listed. So I'll have to cover them separately, because the question about integrity and ethics are quite differently managed in these two setups. So we have migrated to a different term. I'm not so sure whether you have this term, government-linked companies, where we define them that they are managed by government-linked investment companies. There are 6 of those. And most of them are listed in the stock exchange and at the federal level. But our SOEs are companies which are wholly owned by the government. There are 44 of them, which are 99% owned by the government. It's under the Ministry of Finance Incorporated. And that's governed by a separate entity, right? So when we talk about transformation of our GLCs, we talk about where the federal government owns a majority or single largest shareholder. They have control over the board, appointment of boards, senior management, awards of tenders and contracts, divestment strategy, and so on. One of the biggest problem we've had then and now is appointment of politicians. I'm sure you all have that problem too. Although our government back then, 7 years ago, stated that there shouldn't be any active politician on the boards of GLCs or even chairman of GLCs. Unfortunately, that word was broken about 3-4 years ago, and after that we went spiraling down, right? When you have active members of politics being a head chairman of a government-linked investment company, wow, that sends shockwaves in the system. Personally, myself, when I got into this job in Malaysian Directors Academy, I was so pleased to know that no politicians, active politicians, ex-politicians, yes, but not active politicians. Yeah, I think there's something, one big lesson I hope all of you will learn when you go back. Right? That's a no-no, because you get conflict of interest, you get a lot of different agenda governing the companies. Okay, this is just a framework of the transformation program that we have. But what is important is that we have a governance element, this part here, which track the progress of the transformation program. These are the famous 10 books. Now, why I'm sharing this with you is that most of them have got relevance to integrity and ethics. For example, we have a book on corporate social responsibility. Do you know why we have that? Because before this transformation, a lot of GLCs, companies and CEOs were complaining that they get calls from ministers, from politicians for supporting their own agenda. So you cannot differentiate what is social responsibility, what is political responsibility. So much so that there was just too much interference. So with this book, it was clearly stated that what you consider as corporate social responsibility, and you have a right to say no, right? You even have a book on procurement. I'm sure procurement at your government level can be a big headache if it's not done properly. So we have a book, the red book we call it, that is to manage procurement, how you manage procurement, tender committees, PCG, which is Putrajaya Committee on GLC Transformation. We have Ministry of Malaysian Institute of Integrity. We have MACC, Malaysian Anti-Corruption Agency. So all those are ecosystem that you must have. Yeah, those are ecosystems you must have, because without it, there's lawlessness in the society, right? But I can assure you, even with all this, there can still be lawlessness if people don't follow the guidelines. Yeah, and then we have legislation through the Companies Act, which was just revised. The first one was 1967. It wasn't revised until recently. So there are a lot of new rules in the Companies Act which can send you to jail for 20 years and fine you for 5 million ringgit, for example, which is more onerous than before. So those are tougher laws that was put into place. And lastly, the Code of Corporate Governance, MCCG, Malaysian Code of Corporate Governance, which is prepared by the Securities Commission. And this code dictates, for example, that an independent director cannot be independent after 9 years. After 9 years, you have to leave or stay on as a non-independent director. So things like that to strengthen corporate integrity and corporate governance. And it is so pertinent nowadays. Just to quickly go through a detail a bit about the accountable bodies. One is the PCG, which is, as I said, the head, the body that monitors the GLC transformation program. For example, in terms of transparency, those days, companies like Telecom Malaysia, Malaysia Airlines, energy sector, nobody knows how they perform, right? Every year, they just give themselves good bonuses and that's it. But with this, there is this thing made public, which are the KPIs. So all the GLCs will have to announce their KPIs. Not many, just 3, 4, right? And if they don't achieve their KPIs, no bonus, right? There was one particular GLC which actually gave bonus even though they did not achieve their KPIs, they were reprimanded publicly. So what I'm saying is that transparency is very clear when we have a good corporate governance structure. Second one is the Malaysian Institute of Integrity. Not many people know what they do actually, but one of the things they want to do is to have a compliance officer for every company. Every GLC should have a compliance officer embedded in your company to ensure that all the corporate governance matters are being complied with. Some have done it, some have not, but it's a good idea. Yeah. So we have a code of ethics for all companies, and there is this National Integrity Plan launched in 2004, which established a fully moral and ethical society whose citizens are strong in religious and spiritual values. Interestingly, we brought religion into the matter, because the fear of God is one of those things that we think can make change a person, yeah, and spiritual values imbued with the highest standards of ethical standards. All these are nice words, yeah. It doesn't mean anything if it's not practiced and is not believed in. Yeah. The third one is the MACC. Okay, it's been called many names, right? But now it's called MACC, Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission. What has, if I may go back into the case of, the recent case of 1MDB, as you all are aware, I was talking to Hans this morning. 1MDB, in my view, is not an SOE, and neither are they a GLC. They are a sovereign wealth fund. But because they are outside the realm of corporate governance of a SOE and GLC, they can do whatever they want, which is what they did. It's what they did. And it's only a change of government and a change of the head of MACC and a change of the Attorney General and a change of the Inspector General of Police and all that can make it happen. Right? I shamelessly, I will admit that the old government have parked all their key people with their own yes men, and nothing moves. But only when the new government comes in, all of this, for example, MACC have got a new head. And with all this, the report on 1MDB became public. Previously, it was called under the OSA, Official Secrets Act, although it was done by the Auditor General. No, nobody can see it. It's under OSA. But when it is released, my goodness, the amount of shit hitting the fan, if I may use the phrase, comes out. So what I'm saying is that this is a huge, huge development in our country. I hope you don't have to go through that, because it can be very painful. And thank God I could see it in my lifetime. Yeah, and I sincerely believe that it is the right thing to be done, although it is done by a 93-year-old man who is the oldest elected Prime Minister, who's becoming the Prime Minister for the second time around. I hope he will live long enough to see all his reforms happen. The Companies Act, as I mentioned, it was massively changed, and I think that will augur well for the country. Okay, this is under the new government, as I mentioned earlier. One of the first things that was done was to remove all political appointees. Again, I cannot overemphasize the rule of law that says you cannot be in politics and running companies, government-linked companies at the same time. It's simply not tenable, right? But this rule was broken, and unfortunately, as expected, the results were quite out of this world in that sense. Yeah? So because of this, I really hope that if I were to leave one message here is that to make sure that you don't have political appointees on your boards, but particularly SOEs. It's very easy to not say no, but that will be the start of a problem at time. Secondly, the excessive remuneration. Now, how does the government of the day make sure that the SOEs toe the line? By paying them huge amounts of money. Really, the GLC heads and chairman of companies make millions of ringgit every year. Never heard before. And because of that, they are indebted to the powers that be, and nobody asks anything, nobody questions. Everything went on smoothly and nicely, yeah? Until a storm comes and you have to change the captain of the ship. So I mentioned most of this earlier on in terms of the 1MDB case. It's still a court case is ongoing. It's due in early next year, so we hope something positive comes out of the court case. Okay, with that, I'd like to do a quick recap that, again, the tone at the top is something that all of us have to manage. If the tone at the top is not right, I think the organization will be bound to go into rough waters. So with that, Madam Chair, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Abubakar. It was very, yes, very interesting and indeed quite convincing examples that you gave us. And I think what I would remind from you is, of course, you have to, there's something you cannot do much about it. It's the individual mindset of people, because this is, you know, formed at early age, probably in the family. So that's something you cannot do much about it. Just hope that your families are good enough to raise good kids, you know. And but what is very important is, as you said, the tone at the top, and it was mentioned by previous speakers also. I mean, you could not have integrity in SOEs if you don't have integrity in politics and in the government, and that's something quite challenging sometimes. And one you know, link in between these two big recommendations, it's like avoid appointments of politicians on SOE boards, and that's a very, sometimes a very difficult proposition. That's a proposition that is discussed a lot in our working party on state and enterprise. I guess you will mention that in the next session also, because it's still probably one of the most discussed points when at the G20 there was this discussion on high-level principles for integrity in the state and enterprises. That's an area where not everybody agrees on, not all countries agree on in principle. So, and from our experience at the OECD, also when we have countries accessing to the OECD and we do reviews of their corporate governance practices for listed companies, but also for state-owned companies, it's always like the last remaining point where we have difficulties and where it's very difficult sometimes for political reasons for countries to change this, you know, avoiding having political appointees on boards. So that's, with that, we have already eaten a little bit of our time for the coffee break, but I don't want to lose the opportunity to have all this experience on the table. So I first leave some minutes for questions from the audience. Do you have any questions? I mean, it was very rich discussion, a lot of interesting cases. So I don't know if you have any questions. Otherwise, I will have one and try to sum up maybe the whole discussion. Let's say that I'm nominated as an independent director of a big French SOE, my country. What piece of advice would you give me if, for example, one of my main strategy or priority is to make sure that we have integrity in this state and enterprise? As a new board member, what you would tell me, what are the two things I should care about? What are the two things I should do or make sure that they are done? So maybe we'll begin with you.
For an independent director, once he or she joins, it is first thing is to indoctrinate and to make the person acquainted with the business process that the company is carrying on. And after understanding the business, then the rules and lay down policies, including the code of conduct meant for the directors. Those are to be given, made the new appointee understand that. And then the overall objective, policy and the plan of the company, either through a presentation or through a book, that sharing has to be done so that the new person feels that he is a part and parcel, an integral part of the board. And another thing what basically one would expect is, after understanding the business process, then the alignment with the overall goal, keeping in mind the public good, keeping in mind the country's or the nation's requirement, and keeping in mind the global practices. So all those benchmarks, it would be expected from the independent director to guide the board on decision-making process, and decisions are to be incompatible, should be compatible with the benchmarks, standards, the integrity pact, the code of conduct, and also in line with the global compact that if the company has adopted that.
Thank you very much for the advice.
OK， 现在在我们中国，现在非常重视合规管理，那么我们董事会呢，已经把合规管理作为董事会公司治理建设的一个重要的内容。
So in Chinese practice, we are pay much attention to the establishment and construction of the compliance system, and this is a priority of the policy priority of the Chinese SOEs right now.
为了提高对这项工作的重视程度呢，我们在去年专门修改了公司章程。我们把合规管理作为公司董事会以及公司的战略委员会的一项重要的职责。
And also are for the Mr. Yu's company for their practices, they have modified, revised their articles of association and of their company to are putting to set out the requirements of the compliance as the main priority area, and yeah, this is a very forward-looking change.
因此，我们的董事会和我们的董事会的战略委员会，每年要定期的听取公司管理层在合规管理建设方面的工作的汇报。
So annually, they are board of directors of China Railway Corporation, and will be reported by the management about the compliance practices every year, and also the management are required to report to the a strategic committee of the board of directors.
我们的合规管理呢，其中也包括像反垄断啊、反不正当竞争啊，还有反腐败啊，以及反洗钱这些内容。
There also are a lot of important components in the compliance practice in China Railway Construction Cooperation, including, among others, including the anti-competition, anti-monopoly, and anti-bribery, and anti-money washing, like that, etc.
现在呢 ，SASAC 已经把合规管理作为整个所有的中央企业要求加强建设的一个重要的方面。
SASAC has recently released our guidance about on the strengthening and establishment of the compliance to the central SOEs under the supervision of SASAC.
就在前年，国务院国资委呢 SASAC 专门组织了中央企业的相关的管理人员赴美国进行了为期将近1个月的合规管理的学习和培训。
And last year, SASAC has organized a batch of our central SOEs executives to take part in a training program on the compliance system in the United States.
So I should attend this training program.
Yeah, very quick. If I were to give you advice of an independent director, besides making sure there is a transparency policy, integrity policy, code of conduct, and all that, as mentioned by Dr. Ashria, is to make sure there is a lead independent director. I find that practice is not widely accepted globally, but in Malaysia it's slowly becoming acceptable, because the only person who can challenge your chairman, who is most of the time non-independent and representing the board majority, is the lead independent director. So that practice is good because you can have a good check and balance at the board. Yeah, thank you.
Very quickly, to just give 2 points as Madam has asked. What I've seen, the various committees are working within the board. It may be a subcommittees on tenders, the business development committee, audit committee, and these. What I'll prefer that if the committees, if required, they should go with they should be selected from some expert in the particular domain may be adopted or invited for the deliberation in the committee, so that some of the independent directors or functional directors, whoever are not having that particular knowledge in the domain, are supplemented with the expert advices. And the second will be the audit committees, internal auditors and external auditors. They should have a interaction instead of individually writing the reports and all. A briefing session should be there, and then the board should be apprised with their conclusions and all.
Well, I simply wanted to add, very much in consistency with the point of having to set the tone at the top, how important the position of the board chairman is. At the end of the day, it's the board chairman that really orchestrates the operation of the board. It is the board chairman that, in fact, sends the proper signals of the type of culture, integrity, and ethics that will have to be lived and observed within the enterprise. So great care has to go into the selection of the chairman of the board. Some chairmen are very good, but they're very busy. Some chairmen of the board maybe they have too much of a political ambition, as my friend Abdul Aziz did mention, and therefore could not really give a lot of importance to the enterprise as such. So a lot of thought has to be given to the appointment of a good chairman that is not only competent, but really committed to good governance within the SOE. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So with that, we have a lot of very good advice. Yes?
Good morning. My name is Shinbo Won. I am from Blackrock. We are a private sector investor, and we do also invest in state-owned enterprises that are publicly listed. First of all, I'd like to thank the panel for a very informative session this morning. And I have a question specifically to Mr. Yu. As Dr. Stanislaw rightly stated this morning, I believe state-owned enterprises should reflect unique characteristics of that country. And in that respect, I believe China's system, where the CPC plays a leadership role in state-owned enterprises, is a very unique characteristic of Chinese SOEs, as you shared with us. In our industry, when the law changed this year to incorporate that into the company's articles, it stirred a lot of debate in terms of how the CPC actually interacts with the board of the companies and how that leadership is, I guess, displayed or in real life exerted. Could you kindly share with us the details of how that actually happens? I guess some of the questions would be, do they participate in the board level meetings, or is board level meetings something that is reported to the CPC? So if you could share with us a little more detail on that, I think it would help our understanding of the very unique Chinese SOE leadership system and the corporate governance system. Thank you.
Thank you. 中国共产党在中国对我们国有企业的领导，它这个地位是中国的宪法规定的。那么其实党对国有企业的领导呢，在我们在国有企业的公司治理的建设过程当中，它和公司治理现有的主体的职责是不冲突、不矛盾的。
leadership of the Communist Party in China over the SOE regime has a constitutional base. And there is no contradiction between the different corporate governance or entities. There is no contradiction with each other. With the strengthening of the Communist Party, Chinese CPC leadership, there is no contradiction.
那么国有企业中的党组织，它发挥的作用呢，主要是把握政治方向，就是那么国有企业在日常的管理和经营当中，不能违反应当说党中央所制定的方向性的政策。那么在这样的一个原则和前提下，公司作为市场的经济主体，是享有自主的经营权的。
So they are the main task of the CPC over CPC's leadership over SOE is to determine the general direction of the of SOEs to guarantee there is no dereliction, no derogation or derail from the policy direction of the of Chinese Communist Party, as well as the laws and the regulations and the policy, other important policies. And okay.
那么，其实，在企业的日常的生产经营过程当中，决策的主体，生产经营方面决策的主体仍然是公司的董事会和经理层。
So the leadership of the party does not mean the party will intervene in their day-to-day operations of the SOEs. The SOEs are actually in practice the real market economy and is market-oriented entity, and the board of directors of Central SOEs enjoys their decision-making rights and their autonomous discretion.
因此呢，国有企业当中的党组织是不会取代公司的董事会和经理层，去决策关于在市场经营管理过程当中的相关的重大议题的。
So in terms of the day-to-day operations of the and performance of the SOE, the CPC party committee will not replace the board of directors. That it should have their role set out in relevant laws and regulations.
因此，公司我们通过我们的公司章程，通过我们公司的有关的议事规则，非常明确地界定了，比如说国有企业这种党组织和我们的董事会和经理层在履行职责过程当中的边界。
The articles of association of each SOE and has it clarifies very clearly and defines very clearly the borderline between the board of directors and CPC committee and or the CPC group with regard to their different roles.
好，谢谢。
Oh, thank you. And I will elaborate more on this topic about that. Is when Mr. Yu told that there is a main priority of the CPC committee. Their role when they are playing their role is one is to determine the general direction, and there are three main tasks of them. One is the determination of the general direction. The second is to manage the overall situation, and the last is to guarantee the implementation of laws and regulations and policy priorities. Thank you.
I think now we really have to stop. Another question, but please a short one and short answers, because otherwise you won't have any coffee.
Well, it was not a question, but just a submission. I am UD Chaube from India. Yes. With regard to advising an independent director, like Madam Chair, who has experience, knowledge and everything with her, but I thought I must share one point, that independent directors are supposed to be independent by name, not influenced by any political or social agenda when they are sitting on the board. Also, they are some sort of conscience keeper and a watchdog while sitting on the fence of the board meetings to ensure that there is no angle of corruption. This is particularly very important for independent directors. And finally, they should not depend on any other factors. Otherwise, they become dependable independent directors. So that is the main thing. I hope I have submitted the...
Thank you. And now we really stop. So we have a lot to reflect on. Thank you very much for sharing your experience from very diverse countries, but with very common challenges in terms of compliance and corruption, tone of the top, individual mindsets, all the mechanisms that can be put in place, the role of independent directors, etc., etc. I will conclude just by advising you to read this excellent report. We will discuss many of the points in the next session. Also, we will consult with you on these guidelines that we want to develop on corruption and state-owned enterprises. So we will continue this conversation after a short coffee break. Thank you very much.